Blimey. Ooh, this is one hell of a jam jar you got here.
Warning. The House of Mystery contains demons, angels, elementals, magicians, wizards, apparitions, adult language, and discussions. If you're easily offended, do not enter the House of Mystery.
All right, then. On with the show.
All right, hello, welcome everyone to the House of Mystery, the John Constantine and Friends podcast. I am Michael, your host. I'm in the studio, as per usual, with the demon bisexual butler, David Sabal. Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, so we are back to discuss Hellblazer. We're delving into the original Hellblazer run again, with a discussion on issue number 3. Now, if you are new to the show, you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just search House of Mystery and scroll through our past shows to find our breakdown on issue 1 and 2. It shouldn't take you too long. We started doing it, I want to say, about a year ago. However, Dave, you know, we have been taking our sweet-ass time with this, and I figured at this rate we'll cover all 300 issues either on or before the year 2067.
2067.
We are taking our time on this. Someone sent me a message like, hey, are you going to get back to doing Hellblazer? Because you haven't done one in a while. Like, well, you know, I told you guys at the very beginning, we're going to take our time.
We're going to take our time. And I'm sorry, there's so much to cover in every single... Not a lot of people realize that, Mike, that when you go back to the old Vertigo runs, there is so much substance behind every single issue because Hellblazer came out at a time when comic books, especially like Vertigo, were coming off of the heels of the advent of what a lot of comic book historians call the boom of the Dark Knight phase of comics, when basically graphic novels just ruled the roost.
Yeah.
You had like stories like The Dark Knight, Watchmen, Doom Patrol come out all at once.
It changed the idea of what comic books can
be.
Yeah.
And then writers started saying, you know what? I can do a comic book story and it doesn't have to be just two-dimensional. And that's when you had like writers like Alan Moore, Grant Morrison. Everyone started actually coming out of the woodworks and saying, I'm going to take this medium that was meant for kids and show that adults can actually read a comic and gain some substance out of it, like reading a book.
Yeah. Well, sticking with that line of reasoning, Dave, I would even argue that Hellblazer, now there's other titles you can probably point to and say this as well, but Hellblazer, in my opinion, the original 300 issue run, is more than just a piece of pop culture. I would consider it literature. It has that type of content there. There's something to be said about what they are choosing to dissect in these stories, in the Hellblazer Vertigo run. Specifically in issue 3 here, I mean, they're not holding back.
No, they're not holding back on this one.
No, not at all. I mean, it's just balls to the wall, political. So for those of you who may not remember, Jamie Delano was the writer that penned the early run of Hellblazer, at least initially.
Yes.
Volume 1 is composed of Hellblazer issues 1 through 9 and Constantine's first introduction in DC canon, Swamp Thing 76 and 77. And that is what we're currently working our way through. Now, issue 3, titled Going For It, was written by Jamie Delano with art by John Ridgway and was originally published March 1988. It is the first standalone Hellblazer issue. The story sees John dealing with soul brokering demons in London and is a satire of soulless Thatcherite economics.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of statements politically being made in this issue.
Well, the cool thing about, like, not a lot of comic book fans know this, but like Jamie Delano was part of what was called the British invasion of American comics.
Okay.
he was actually the one that this was after Alan Moore. And when Alan Moore came out and basically blew everyone's doors off of what he can bring, all these English writers followed suit.
Hello.
And they basically brought over their writing over to America and said, "Oh, look what Alan Moore did. Okay, you think he's one of the best? No, there was a plethora of English writers back then, and it was dubbed the British Invasion back in the 1980s. That's when Vertigo hit its peak. Because if you look at Vertigo's run, all of Vertigo titles were penned by a lot of those British Invasion authors, like Jamie Delano, like Grant Morrison, like the other one. I can't believe his name excludes me because he's my favorite author of all time. But the one that does Sandman,
Neil Gaiman.
Yeah, he was part of the British Invasion of comics, and their whole thing with bringing stuff over was to try to bring over what I read about it was the characteristics of the British Invasion included a greater sensitivity to language and more mature storylines, and moved away from the superhero genre. Mm-hmm. That's why when you see a lot of
stories more steeped in the human condition.
Yes,
yeah.
And that's why when you see a lot of writing videos by Alan Moore, he always feels that superhero comics were so one-dimensional, and his whole point was to make your stories matter and have substance and make it more than one-dimensional. And that's the argument of all the British Invasion writers, was the fact that superhero comics back then was so one-dimensional. It's just the baddie and the goodie.
Right.
It was never about like what you just brought up, the human nature, the human condition. And then they brought it in, and DC took the chance because they weren't sure if their audience was actually ready for this type of writing. So in essence, they put them all in Vertigo because that was the experimental side of DC.
Right. Yeah.
And then if you look at it now, everyone looks at that Vertigo, all those Vertigo titles as like what you said, it's not just comics.
Yeah,
it's literature now.
It is literature. It's not. I don't consider this comic books, and that's not me saying anything negative about comic books. I love comic books, but when you take the story or the authors you were mentioning, as well as Hellblazer, they have something to say. They're doing something, and it's not something to say for the purposes of virtue signaling and standing on a platform, pointing your finger down at people for not thinking the way you think. These are stories that are designed to dissect the current political climate. And certainly Delano definitely, he shares his ideology without a doubt. But Absolutely. That's not a negative. It's from I'd say a non-conservative perspective, but that doesn't mean there aren't truths there to people's perspectives on an event or a time frame that they lived in. I mean, we all know that to this day, when you pop on the news, everyone's reporting the same thing, but depending on what channel you're watching or what website you're reading, there's going to be a very different view to the news.
Yes.
So this issue is immersed in political commentary.
Oh, absolutely.
Delano at this time was offering, I'd say, a cynical critique of 80s conservatism that swelled during the reign of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. I believe the story takes place around the same time that the Conservative Party had won its third consecutive election, to many people on the left dismay, which was June 11th, 1987. So this is roughly, let me get my facts straight here. So the third consecutive election took place June 11th, 1987, and the story takes place June 11th, 1987, and the comic book came out March 1988. So less than a year later, he is telling this story about his views on what's happening in this country. And for you American folks, as per usual, the politics of Britain and America seems to typically mirror each other in a lot of ways. And this was during the Reagan era as well, a time when a new era of conservatism returned to politics. This was a time when liberalism, for the most part, had a successful I don't want to say liberalism. Let's say left.
Left.
Yeah, because liberalism nowadays comes with so many different meanings. Just say when it comes to, you know what? Let me make a definition here. Liberalism, as we discuss it in this particular discussion, is going to connote left-leaning.
Yes.
Okay? So let me backtrack just a bit. As per usual, when it comes to the dual powers, America and Britain, they typically mirror each other politically. So what Margaret Thatcher was doing, that's what a lot of Reagan was doing. Very similar type of governance. And
well, if you look at their parties that they belonged to, Thatcher was the leader of the Conservative Party.
right.
Reagan was essentially the leader of the Republican Party.
Yes.
Both of the policies that govern the ideals of both parties are identical.
Yeah. Yeah. So taking that and keeping that in mind, this was a time when liberalism, for the most part, had a successful, unbridled run for well over a decade.
Yeah.
We had the sexual revolution, we had the civil rights era, and Reagan's driving campaign promise was to make America great again. Sounds familiar, right?
Sounds very familiar.
Parallels, and that, I should say, parallels Great Britain's return to Victorian values.
Yes.
So both of which work to calm some of the mounting anxieties that many felt due to the uncertainty of the time. That's what led to this reign of conservative ideals. The return to a prior era was because of all the uncertainties that people were feeling, the anxieties that were building because of the civil rights era. Britain had one too.
Yes.
People don't typically
talk about it,
but they also had a civil rights era. The ending of one of the most controversial wars as well, the Vietnam War. Also the effects of the Cold War, where the United States and the USSR supported major conflicts and various proxy wars. So there was all of these things going on. Those were the ingredients that would essentially shape the time period. Now, this isn't a political show, so I'm not looking to argue one political ideology over another because, to be honest, no one has gotten it right yet.
No one's ever gotten it right.
There are some that are no doubt better than others on both sides of the political spectrum. But anyway, I bring this up for purposes of context. In order to fully benefit from Delano's writing and to understand what was being done, you have to have a bit of context of the political landscape of the time, as well as the momentum that fed into that rise of conservative thought, or the return to Victorian values, or the return to making America great.
Yeah, because it helps understand what his message in his comic is saying.
Right.
Because just like what you alluded to earlier, Delano brings a more cynic type of writing.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that in a lot of his comics. That's the power that he brings.
Cynicism.
Yeah. And it's satire to a lot of degree with a lot of his writings and his storytelling, because that's part of also the British invasion ideology of writers back then. Was like this, they brought over this like cynic point of view of the human condition, and they used elements that they've all seen all around them and put it into their storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to understand, just like what we're about to actually talk about and what Delano is saying, you have to understand the political environment. The scary thing that I found after I actually finished writing this, or not writing, but reading this, Mike.
You wrote this.
Yeah, I wrote this. But after reading this, after reading
you were
this,
quite the prodigy.
it is so weird to actually see you can use this type of storytelling today and it still matches verbatim. You just have to paint and swap.
How depressing.
It's depressing.
How depressing. That is why I am so cynical, Dave. That is why I laugh when I see all these people crying in the streets. Oh my God, society. I'm like, yes, society sucks.
Society sucks.
But it
yes.
sucked forever.
And that's
like,
what
this
makes
isn't new. We're literally on repeat. In fact, yeah, go ahead.
And that's what makes us John Constantine. I mean, this is what made John Constantine so popular, is because Constantine taps into that part of the human audience, that's us, that basically says we are surrounded by a bunch of idiots. We are.
Yeah.
But we have to live through this life. And it's like, that just makes it more, I don't know, it makes it more depressing.
It does. I mean, listen,
What do you think?
David, the German philosopher Hegel said it best. The only thing we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history.
That's history.
So the reason why so many people hate Thatcher or hated Thatcher, let me go through this. And when I say so many, I'm talking, of course, from Delano's perspective, because for every point here, there's a conservative point that would rebuttal. So these are the points, okay? She supported the retention of capital punishment. She destroyed Britain's manufacturing industry, and her policies led to mass unemployment. She presided over interest rates of 15%. She voted against the relaxation of divorce laws. She abolished free milk for school children. She precipitated a social housing crisis still being felt today.
Yep.
The poll tax. She sowed the seeds of NHS privatization. Section 28. Thatcher's quiet homophobia with a question mark, the Irish hunger strikes. So those are 10 points. And that's, again, just to give you a greater perspective as to what Delano is going up against from his perspective and views on the political climate of the 1980s. Now that we've set the table, we can understand the political spirit of the issue and possibly understand the narrative a bit more when seen through the lens of Delano's experience of living through this very time period. Now, while reading issue 3, you can feel the frustration of the times.
Yeah.
The desperation and the financial struggle. So Delano was really skilled at conveying a feeling, not just words, not just a bleeding heart liberal, not just a man filled with naivete saying, why can't things be like this? He was putting so much skill and thought into not just what he wanted to say, but also conveying a mood. And that's exactly what he was able to accomplish in this issue by fully understanding and immersing himself in these political times. And what better way to cynically blast the times than through a character like Constantine?
Oh yeah, it's so beautiful, and it's beautifully written, because like
It really is.
when you look at how he starts, and you see the imagery that he's trying to convey, and then you end it with Thatcher's speech when she wins the British the leadership, and you end it with her speech, and you realize what people like Delano must have felt like. He captures it perfectly. And as a reader, you begin to understand why they are so cynical. Why the writers of the British invasion are so cynical is because when they look at what their leaders are saying, but versus the reality of everything, it's almost like you don't take the leadership seriously. That's what makes Thatcher so comical when you get down to it, because what she's saying is utter BS.
I mean, essentially, she was the antagonist.
Essentially, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it felt like, because the way it ended, it felt like ... to be continued.
And that's the thing that in itself is also why you see a lot of Vertigo titles go away from superhero elements,
Yeah.
because there's no real baddie or goodie. It's really basically just bringing human themes to light. And then there's not really quote unquote a baddie. There is a baddie, but the real baddie is the theme that the writer is trying to convey.
Right. Which in many ways is the indictment of, or I should say in many ways, this is the indictment of the financial district and the banking practices that many economic theorists believed was due to the overall leadership of the so-called Iron Lady, is what they called Margaret Thatcher. And Delano uses this frame or I should say, Jesus, I'm losing my train of thought already. We barely started, David. Please, I need some help.
Well, because like think about this, Mike. We're dealing with a comic that is not only tackling politics, it's dealing with ethics. It's dealing with morals. There's like, when you get into Hellblazer, you're like looking at the stereotypical onion that has so many layers.
Well, it's challenging the ethical practices of the investment banking district.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because like this one comic is basically saying, when you take a look at it, capitalism sucks. Capitalism is tied to devils.
Yeah.
And you're like going, you can't argue that.
But capitalism is also the reason why you can tell the story.
Yes.
And sell the comic book.
Sell the comic book. And think about
therein lies the problem.
Therein lies the
with
problem.
Society.
And think about it. The last image of Constantine saying, like I said, there's more than one road to hell.
Yes.
And it's and you wonder why Constantine is the way he is. Just for people who are listening to us, look at the book, and it's almost like everything is chosen picture perfectly, because when you end with Constantine hanging upside down, and his final words is, like I said, there's more than one road to hell, and he's just hanging upside down, and he has this look like he's just so done.
Well, it shows that he can't really win.
He can't win.
That was the whole point. Ending with Margaret Thatcher and him upside down. It was essentially saying that even this villain is too big
for him, for
John Constantine.
And he's just been done dealing with I can never pronounce the demon's name right. I think it's Biloxi.
I would say Biloxi.
Biloxi. And like, he's had to deal with him, but at the end of the day, there's just another big evil that's just taking root in society. Yeah. And Constantine's like, oh, well.
Right.
What do you do?
Yeah. So all of this, David, bringing it back to the financial aspect, Delano uses this to frame his story. That's essentially what he's doing, and lay the groundwork for the rise of a demon known as Blathoxy.
There you
the
go.
Lord of Flatulence and Hell, and a major player on the soul trading market, which serves as a very powerful metaphor for market traders and other investment types.
Oh, yeah.
Also, it draws parallels to other groups of individuals that played a part in a cultural change that some became concerned about, and that was the rise of the yuppies, which is essentially short for young, upward mobile professionals. And it was a term that became popular in the 80s for young professional persons working within the city. It started off as just a general neutral term and quickly turned to something more pejorative because of concerns over gentrification.
Yes.
Which is also a big part of the narrative, the correlation between financial struggle and the privilege of profit, or the privileging of profit. And I will say, I appreciate Delano using a meta-narrative device to call himself out about his own political discourse before proceeding to engage fully with the narrative, because he cleverly uses, I don't know if you caught this, he cleverly uses Constantine's narration to do this. After extensively fleshing out the political aesthetic within those opening 4 to 5 pages, in page 5, he actually writes, "I'm not here to write social comment documentaries," which effectively allows a transition from informative context to fictional world that operates within the peripheral of reality.
Yeah.
That's why I thought it was smart. So not only was he using those opening pages to set the stage, he also was well aware that it might be a little too wordy politically. Like, I don't want to say heavy-handed because it wasn't, but it comes close.
Yes.
To being heavy-handed during those opening pages. But when he calls himself out, it allows us to understand, okay, we got the context. Now we're moving into the fictional side of this story.
Yes.
And that's one thing that I love when authors call themselves out, when they're aware. There's a lot of writers out there that have zero awareness. That is why we have the content on the CW.
Yeah.
That is
pretty much.
That there's a lot of people out there wanting to do good things. They want to say things politically. They want to be important, and they want to champion the good cause, right?
Yeah.
I don't think any of those people over at the CW are evil necessarily. or what, evil. That's not even the right word I was looking for. I don't think any of them are trying to do anything bad per se to annoy individuals. I think they don't have the skill set or the understanding to disperse or to dissect social commentary properly.
Yes. Because at the end of the day, this is also kind of like goes back to the concept of the British invasion of comics, is like the whole point of it was they wanted to challenge. This is just not just writing for a superhero comic. It should just not be, I'm writing a simple comic book. No. Yeah, you're writing a simple comic book, but you still can give it substance.
Yeah.
You can still put some effort into it.
And I think that's what he was trying to do. He's trying to prove a point and then set the stage, because especially when you go from the first 2 issues, which definitely had a lot going on, but it wasn't overly political. So you go from the first 2 issues to the 3rd issue, it's probably going to catch some people off guard, especially if there was a conservative readership of Hellblazer. I doubt there was in the 80s. I could be wrong, but I don't really see conservative individuals picking up Vertigo to begin with, because of its violence, because of its content. So I don't know if he had to worry about that, but either way, he was able to successfully lay down the groundwork to position the story to move forward outside of just political and into the fictional realm as well.
Well, I thought what was genius was like you start off like what you said with the first 4 pages, where he's just basically giving his perspective on society in general. Does that transition from I'm not here to write a social comment documentary, I'm here to investigate dead yuppies, and immediately the tone, just writing wise, switches.
Yeah.
Where he also now goes into full detail of where Constantine is. You know, he's visiting this store, he's visiting Ray's, and he goes on this atypical description that you would expect out of a book or someone telling a story.
Right.
And basically goes into this heavy dialogue, kind of drama moment or melodrama between Constantine and Ray, the shop owner.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was actually really, it could be considered really jarring, but it's actually, when you take a look at it from then on out, it just flows perfectly. It's almost very poetic.
Yeah. Well, you have the transition. That's why I mentioned it, because it is a bit jarring, but because you have that meta aspect, that allows Delano to transition. So we see Constantine moving into this story a bit more. We see him setting off to investigate dead yuppies, and as he delves deeper into the mystery of their deaths, he stumbles upon a financial scheme that involves soul trading, which of course has a type of monetary value in hell. This is where Delano's, I guess you can say, loathing for the financial giants of Great Britain really takes shape.
Oh, yeah.
As he depicts these individuals as demonic powers who carefully orchestrate financial markets in a way that benefits the ones in power. Or I suppose a better way of saying this is that he firmly places the financial struggle at the feet of the financial institutions themselves that are propped up by the profit-seeking hegemonic powers.
Yes.
That, again, is a smart metaphor.
Oh, easily.
It's fucking, I don't want to say, I'm looking for a word an adjective that would really be more impactful than powerful, but it does the trick. It sets the stage and it shows you the nefarious desires of the financial market and how they sometimes, that whole cliche that they are soulless, that the people on Wall Street and the investment bankers are soulless people who only care about profit and, monetary gains, essentially.
Oh, yeah. And I like the choice of words he decides to use when Bathoxy is talking to the other demons, because it's not like this overblown demonic talk. No, it's all financial jargon.
Yes.
Oh, stocks are going up, stocks are going down.
Yeah, it isn't like we're going to destroy the world. They're using industry jargon
that you would expect. I mean, right off the bat, the one thing that caught me off guard, and it took me a while to actually get used to, because I myself am not used to hearing the financial jargon. It
Right.
took me a couple reads to get used to it, but then I started seeing the patterns where it's like right from the get-go, you say the way we read it, it's the platinum opportunity to corner the UK market. And then he follows up, on the ground, we can buy cheap, strip assets, swell our reserves, and boost the infernal dollar. That is not normal demon speak you would expect in a comic book.
Yeah.
That is almost speak you would almost hear in your daily news article
Financial
dealing
news.
with stock market.
Yeah. Well, it just shows the callousness.
It
The
does.
blasé attitude. Yeah, that's what he's trying to demonstrate. He's trying to demonstrate the callous behavior of the financial district.
Yeah.
I mean,
And-
I'm struggling, Dave.
Well, when you also take it to the visuals that he uses, I mean the visual he chooses for Bathoxy to be like this disgusting, gigantic, obese, gluttonous demon who is all wrinkled, looks like the old guard, right? Because when you think of the financial district, you think old guard. What do they call it? Old money. They call it like old money. And you look at Bathoxy and you go, he is. Delano is using Bathoxy to represent what we think. Oh, those match the ideals of the financial district. Excess, the need to actually this gluttony of finances that never ends.
Right.
And it's like, it's a shame that basically when I reread this, and as I said, one of the depressing things I pulled out of it was like how you could take the things that he's saying here and what he's showing, and you basically see it to today, and nothing has changed, because you can actually copy and paste this story, change a few characters here and there in today's world, and you basically say, oh yeah, this is still going on today.
Yeah.
And it's very depressing, but that's what made it really different to me, because that's how you can actually tell a good writer is like he's focusing on the things that we as mass audiences all know. We all gravitate towards. We all know those stereotypes.
Yeah.
But challenging those images that this is supposed to be about a story about demons and souls, right? But instead, he's telling a story of like corruption, greed.
It's an allegory for our reality at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't just stop there with the banking district and the financial higher ups. We also find out his views on yuppies.
with the two demons.
Because not only are the yuppies moving into the neighborhoods, and some of them are victims, but the ones that are leading this, that are taking the more overt lead in the soul trading, are demon yuppies.
Demon yuppies.
Who are actual soul brokers. Now, this isn't subtle in the least. The narration strengthens the critique of the 80s political climate by saying the political climate's perfect for them. Profit is definitely the top god of the 80s for monetarism, read Satanism. That's literally from a panel. I bet the upwardly mobile have been queuing to sell their souls. Now, monetarism is a school of thought in monetary economics that emphasizes the role of governments in controlling the amount of money in circulation. So they are essentially putting government control of money as equivalent to satanic practices.
Satanic practices. And you know what? If you think about it, you would never think those two things, those two elements would fit so perfectly. But when you take a step back, you go, yeah, you can make anything connect to each other. And
well, okay, so the yuppie thing, it was a big deal. Now I know gentrification has gotten a bad rap. It isn't a great thing. And I feel like that was one of his points he was trying to make, that through gentrification, you build up these communities and then you push the actual people who live there out.
Yeah.
which is not a good thing. That's actually happening here in Arizona right now because of the housing market.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's actually really bad. People don't have homes, they can't afford to live, but people from New York and Los Angeles, or I should say the West Coast, can't afford to live in these homes that are a fraction of the cost that another house would cost. So they come in, move into the neighborhoods, push the people who actually live here out because they can't afford to live in the city anymore.
Yeah.
So it is a problem. Definitely is a problem. So I'm not against it, but he must have some serious loathing for yuppies because he doesn't hold back. The financial bastards, I can get.
Yes.
I can get behind that. There's a lot to hate about Wall Street. Many times there is. Wall Street has problems, and the banks have problems. Investment bankers, there are some serious moral and ethical problems with their practices, with their business practices. But even the yuppies themselves, I mean, he seems to really loathe the yuppies.
He loathes them and sees them as the demons that he portrays in this comic.
They're the overt problem.
They're the overt problem. And like when I think one of my favorite moments in the comic is when you do that cut in and see the two demon yuppies just relaxing in their new apartment, and they're literally talking about enjoying, the suffering of humanity by living there. They enjoy the fact that basically they just took this place, and we know that basically people are suffering out there, and it's glorious. I think it's like at one point it turns on the female demon.
Yeah.
Because like she's so I'm trying to find it here. Oh, it's like she says here, oh, so violent. Let's go to the election party for the pits. Then later we can fill the jacuzzi with fresh blood and do something really cruel. And it's like,
he's not holding back.
He's not holding back.
Yeah.
He's like saying like, you yuppies are these two demons that just enjoy the suffering of all of us. And it's one of those things that normally you would just go, man, the guy's really bitter. But he writes it so eloquently that it's a beautiful piece of satire.
Yes, I agree. But it's not just eloquent. It's also doused in humor. And that always makes everything easier to swallow. So even if you don't follow Delano's politics and maybe you don't agree with it, he at least keeps some levity there, which you kind of have to with a character like John Constantine. So there's room for covering serious topics, but then when it gets too deep into the politics, there's little breaks of humor that help alleviate some of the intensity of the serious nature of the topics being discussed. In page 16, which I thought was brilliant, when Constantine tries to summon the demon and he performs the ritual incorrectly, and he says, I think I need a cat for this. Yeah, fuck the cat.
Fuck the cat.
And then the lesser demon comes and says, Blathoxy considers it an insult that you performed, that he heard you, but he's not coming, even though you summoned him because you summoned it lazily.
Yeah,
you should have used the cats.
Yeah, your ritual was incompetent and insulting.
Yeah. But that brings a chuckle that you need when you're reading this type of comic. And that's a missed art, David, because there's a lot of people who want to be serious nowadays in comics and they want to delve into serious things. And I understand. I'm one of those people as well. When I write, I want to write about serious things, but you also need to know how to write.
Yes.
And if you don't, if your skill set isn't top notch, you probably shouldn't try to tackle things of this type with such heavy substance, because you're not going to do it right. And it makes me miss the times where we had things like this, because Delano's style of writing is a lost art. We don't get these types of political pieces in comic books. Very seldom do we get it this good. I want to say the last time we had something that Ram V did some pretty good stuff through Metaphor with a Swamp Thing run.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He did. Yeah, he actually did some really good shit.
Ram V is one of those writers that basically, I've said in the past in a couple of our shows that Ram V definitely reminds me of like the old guard of Vertigo.
Yeah.
He's one of the newer writers out there that if he were to be brought back into the Vertigo run, I could see his name part of the British invasion crew. And like, that's the thing that's missing in comics.
Cy Spurrier is one of them.
Cy Spurrier's
if you look
one.
at his, what was it, 2020 was his run, his Hellblazer run, 2020. His issue run, the 10 issue run, I believe is what it was. He did great with that. And he also had some moments that, first off, all his issues had some substance. There wasn't one that was light.
Yeah. Because like,
but he also is a good example of someone, if he was given the opportunity, can definitely delve into social commentary or even political commentary in a way that doesn't feel overly insulting. Yeah.
Because like the thing is like when you see the comic book writers now today, you see the more successful ones like Tom Taylor and everyone. And Tom Taylor's been a thorn in our side.
David Y.
But like,
I was going to bring him up, and
Tom Taylor's your Biloxi.
Oh man,
He's your Biloxi.
He's a fucking yuppie.
He's a fucking yuppie. But like when you, that's the issue that I see when I go back and read comic books from back in the Vertigo times, and you see it now. It's a lost art because writers today, they try to bring that substance, but there's a certain talent that's needed to actually do a story like this.
I also think the times have changed to where in years past there was reasons why you had to write things a certain way.
Yes.
Either highly intelligent like Delano did here in issue 3, or through coded aspects that you would have to interpret. And that was done because a lot of these ideals weren't popular.
Exactly.
And so they had to try to code it into their narrative. In today's environment, because we are way more open-minded now, well, at least we should be, there is no attempt to do things with finesse. It's just like, black people are people too, and gay people are people too. I'm like, well, thank you. Of course they are. Can you say something less obvious?
Less obvious. But the problem is there's no substance behind it because they don't want to dive into the ugliness of what they're fighting against. They just want to say it's ugly.
They want to be. It's platitudinal.
Yeah. If you think
That's
about
what it is. It's platitudes and not substance.
One of the best panels that he ever did is a simple panel, and it's the one where Constantine's walking down into hell. And in one panel, he takes this disturbing imagery of Constantine walking on these stairs that are essentially made of people.
Yeah, that was awesome.
And he says it's a disconcerting experience walking on a surface that wails and crunches softly under the foot, but you can't keep apologizing. You'll never see like a writer today tackle that type of disturbing nature of reality.
Mm-hmm.
Ram V comes close. Ram V actually is not afraid to actually tackle something like that. I mean, you look at his current Swamp Thing run, and you're like, he's not afraid to actually tackle the deeper subject.
Parliament of Gears. I mean, that was fantastic.
And tackling those deep issues, but then you juxtapose with like a writer like Tom Taylor, who is just like what you said. He wants to.
It's platitudes. That's it.
Platitude.
That's
and
all
say,
it is.
look at this. This is wrong. My story is about how wrong this is, instead of just showing us.
There you go.
How wrong
you
is
just
it?
hit it on the head. It's the difference between then and now. Delano, and I'm going to use issue 3 again as the example, but of course, there's as you mentioned, other authors during this time that were doing similar things. He's attempting to dissect a very serious problem. That's his goal.
Yeah.
What people like Tom Taylor are doing in today's social environment is making value judgments.
There you go.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
A big difference. And David, you brought up that panel on page 16, I believe. The visuals are so good.
Are so freaking good. And it not only not only is disturbing, but it says a lot for the John Constantine character. Like, Constantine is this type of person that he's willing to go down this route no matter what, you know, and he's like that character that basically says, hey, I know I'm doing a bad thing. I'm walking on the stairway of all these souls and it hurts them. But as he said, I can only keep apologizing for so much.
Yeah.
And that says a lot about his character. and think about it. Delano just needed that little tiny panel to say something about Constantine's character. When in today's writing, I see unfortunately writers take pages. Mike.
Snyder.
Yeah. Take pages to tell me how Bruce Wayne is this broken child who watched his parents die.
Oh, fuck you.
And it takes pages to get to the point.
Yeah.
But back here, a writer takes one panel to get the point across of what type of character Constantine is. This is how writing should be.
Yeah. Now it sounds like we are generalizing here. When we say this is how things should be, I know, and I'm saying this now because I know we're going to get an onslaught of messages. I know there are authors that do this today.
Yes.
But the point is that it's very few.
It's very few.
That's my point. Whereas back then, certainly, for the most part, you could argue that, well, it's the same back then. Yes and no. You had a viable mainstream imprint like just DC and their mainstream titles, Batman, Superman, Aquaman, Wonder Woman. Wait. Yeah. But then you have your more serious titles that were operating under DC for quite some time before they made it a new imprint, which was Vertigo. There was more of an emphasis of putting together a group of stories under Vertigo that delved into very serious topics. We don't have that emphasis now.
We don't
even have a platform for that. Black Label could be that, but Black Label has turned into the Batman imprint.
Exactly. And like it goes on to like saying, and I've gotten this too. I've gotten this a lot. A lot of people have messaged me, especially some comic book writers who do listen to us, have told me, we're out there, David. Yes, we are out there. I know that you guys are out there, but guess what? If I compare today's world to back then in the 80s, there's movements. There's movements of like comic book writers doing this.
David, there's a reason why Vertigo lasted up until what, 5 years ago?
Yeah.
There's a reason why. And the reason why they ended it is because DC no longer cares to put emphasis on those types of stories.
Yeah.
Case in point. Otherwise, we would still have Vertigo.
We'd still have Vertigo because there's not enough good writers who outweigh the bad writers.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bad writers out there that unfortunately...
It's like that with any industry, though, just to be fair.
To actually tell me, look at me and say, oh, there's more good writers out there than bad writers. No.
It's the same thing as a plot book versus a lit novel. That's essentially what we're arguing here.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, David, this does bring us to the end of our discussion. We do have time for final thoughts, Dave. So if you would like to give me your final thoughts as well as your RMD score for this issue, please do so.
My RMD score for this one is a solid 96. I have it written here. I thought it was a 99, but it's actually a 96. I think this is a great issue for introduction into Jamie Delano's type of writing and what to expect out of Hellblazer. Because the first two issues was more or less an introduction into John Constantine as a character.
Mm-hmm.
Issue number 3 is an introduction into the world that is around him. Right. This is what he has to deal with. And this is the type of storytelling you're going to get. It could be considered a little heavy, but this is what to expect. And I appreciate that in issue 3, especially when I look back and I see how much substance Jamie Delano put behind this issue, and it's just not tied to his time, the time that he wrote it. You can take this story and actually, as I said earlier, cut and paste, change the characters out. And this is a story that basically can actually be written today and be well received because it's very relatable. It's relatable to today's world. So I don't know if I should keep harping about it, Mike, but I do think that a lot of people should start reading Hellblazer.
I do too.
This is a
and surprisingly, David, I mean, that's not, I mean, I think you're right in suggesting and motivating people to read this because surprisingly, I've had listeners reach out and ask, should they read the original Hellblazer? And I'm like, abso-fucking-lutely.
Absolutely.
Because there are, and to me, I'm confused at first. I'm like, why haven't you read it yet if you're a Hellblazer fan? But then I realize, I'm like, they started in the 80s. So, and there are a new group of Hellblazer fans who came around during the New 52 era because of the rise of mainstreaming John Constantine like they did.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the John Constantine TV show that then bled into what we had in the CW brought in another group of fans. So there are people who just weren't really sure of the history of the character. They weren't sure if they should read the comic books. And listen, I understand that you might be hesitant because
people automatically see how old it is.
Right. And many times you'll pick up a comic from the 80s or the 90s and it's fucking garbage. You're like, well, this is not what I want to read. But that's not going to be your experience. If you go back and start reading these from the beginning, that won't be your experience because these stand the test of time. Now, I will say, David, I tried my damnedest to look up information pertaining to issue 3's original reception, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So if anyone out there has any real information, meaning an article, an essay where they talk about issue 3 and how it was received in 1988 and whether or not there was any controversy because of his attack of Margaret Thatcher, I would love to know because
it's not very flattering.
I couldn't find a lot of stuff out there. All right, so my final thoughts: the visuals are fantastic, the commentary is great. The idea that there's less emphasis on grand depictions and more focused on the nuanced metaphor, that's where I am as a reader. That's what I want. And that's exactly what issue 3 does. I'm giving it a 97%. And if you are wondering if you should read this, you should.
You should.
You definitely should. All right, this brings us to the end of our discussion. I want to thank all of our listeners. If you are new and this is the first time you found our show, be sure to give us a review on iTunes and Spotify. Just search House of Mystery and give us a thumbs up and review. It does help trigger algorithms that in the end help more people find our show a little easier. Thank you, David.
Thank you.